Okay, my name's Maggie. I teach at Front Range Community College, and today we're going to be talking about impressionistic art. Um, you can think of it as painting. This is a very loose style. It's meant to be loose and not to be like a duplicate or a replication of an image. It needs to be a very loose style using brushes in Illustrator. I'm going to show you a couple of examples from some students last semester. I've only done this project once with my students, so this will be the second time, and they really enjoyed it, and I think they did an amazing job. So I'm really excited to do this project again. All right, so this is just one student piece. Here's another, and you could see very kind of loose brush strokes, especially down in this bottom area. Kind of create that feel of snow. Another example, and this student, this is hers and her dad's like show truck. So she used an image of the truck, laid it in Illustrator, and then used that as kind of like the template to paint over it, which you can absolutely use a reference photo for this project. This is a student's home that she grew up in. She was adopted, and this is very meaningful to her. Obviously kind of a beachy kind of scene, maybe a resort. Obviously picking something like at a place that you've been, maybe a picture you've taken, makes it a little bit more unique for you. So always a good option. So those are a few student pieces. I'm going to show you a couple that I did. I actually did this, did a few of these for Christmas presents this last year. This is a newer technique for me. So this is one I did for my in-laws. This is their cabin, kind of their retirement home. Here's another one that I did. This is my dad and my daughter and a Jeep. My dad's a big Jeeper, so this is a combination. They are painted, and obviously I did some line work, so I wanted to try something just a little bit different. And then let me show you. This is the Illustrator files. So I'm going to show you a couple Illustrator files first so I can kind of show you the layers and how this was built. This one I did kind of an abstract kind of cherry blossom. I started in pink, but I ended up making blue and kind of making this into a different piece. But let me turn off the layers so I can kind of show you. I did a splatter background. I did just kind of a basic drawing to get like the overall kind of shape and some thinner lines. And then I did a base which was a little thicker just to get a little bit more of that kind of structure. And you could see that there are a lot of different, let me turn off these other two layers. Within this base layer, there are many different brushes that I used in here. There's also different colors, different sizes of brushes. Some are real thin, some are really thick. And you want to make sure that you're adding some variation because that's just going to make your piece much better. Here are some thick lines that I added, and this is a pretty big file. This is a 16-inch by 16-inch. What you guys are going to be working on is much smaller since we're working remotely, and a lot of you are working on your own computers, and they may not be able to handle really big files. So I actually made it significantly smaller file this semester. I added some lighter lines here, and notice that my layers are all named, and that does help you. The more layers you can add, the better. It does really help you just to be able to find what it is you're looking for. And of course, you can always turn off and turn on some layers if you need to. That always helps. So here is kind of that final. It's just waiting for the splatter background to come on. That's the final that I did for this piece. And then what I did is I actually took this and I turned it into another piece, which I hung on my wall. You could see, I'm kind of zoomed out so you can see the size of it. But if you zoom in, this is actually printed on like a kind of a metal. And I printed it on 3 different large pieces. This is a pretty large wall, so although I'm zoomed in and it doesn't look big, you can see on that wall it's pretty big. And so I changed those flowers to blue, and I kind of broke it up into some different pieces. So this is vector art, so of course you can definitely scale up and down if you want to print it at a different size. So that's the cherry blossom, and then I'm going to go ahead and close it. And let me open. This is like a beach scene that I did for my sister who lives at the beach. She takes her lunch breaks at the beach and walks, and she just loves it. So I wanted to make her something that really was personal for her. And you can see this one has quite a few layers. I named them. So if I start kind of at the base, this is like a skyline kind of area that I started with. Then I added some water, and if I click in here, you can see that there's different brushes, different size brushes. This is kind of the top of the water, so adding some different colors. Then I started adding some tips of the waves, and then the sand, and then this says water on the sand, so kind of like this kind of the closest water that's real thin that goes over the sand that kind of comes in and out. I added the pier off to this right side, and then I did some waves that are right by the pier. I did the legs of the pier. I added some birds in there. There's just some white areas. You could see, I'll turn it off and on, that are on the sand. Some kind of like white waves that are crashing. And then I did some small waves. So this ended up being my final piece. And notice that I didn't really pay attention to what was outside the artboard. You want to make sure it goes beyond the artboard. Obviously, like my pier, the piece goes off, but I didn't draw any additional legs that aren't going to be seen. But you really want to make sure that you're designing to the edge of your artboard. That's really important. Also, I had never done anything like a beach scene before, so one of the things that I did was I went in and did a little bit of research. So just to kind of show you, I dropped in this folder here called Inspiration, and I just threw some images in here. You could think of this as some research, like what do the waves look like when they're kind of crashing down, and you know, what pieces do I really want to pull in. I wanted some exploration of what a pier might look like, kind of that water. So you could just see some inspiration here. My picture doesn't look like any of these. I was really just pulling in some inspiration. However, I'm not opposed to you pulling in an image that you want to put on a layer, lock it down, and use that kind of as your inspiration. And I'll do that this time just so you guys can kind of see what that might look like. Okay, so those are some examples and just kind of showing you what it is that you're working towards. And for this one, I did this one very long because I found a frame that I wanted to fit this in that was kind of long. So thinking of a landscape and you know, the beach, I wanted something that was definitely landscape, not portrait, but long and a little shorter. What the size that you guys are going to be working on is going to be a 2x3, and if you look at the project sheet, it will tell you that it's a CMYK 2x3 document. If you want it to be square, I'm perfectly fine with that. I would just do it as a 2x2. The smaller that you keep it, the smaller that file is going to be. and that would probably be helpful for your computer not getting bogged down. So we want to keep these a little bit smaller. I have some notes in here, so you're going to determine the subject of your painting. You're going to Google some inspiration pieces for the subject, or you're going to use one that you already have. Either way is fine. You make sure that you make a folder. So like off my desktop, I'm going to make a folder here that's called painting. Let me spell it correctly. So inside that folder, I would make a new folder called inspiration. And that's where I'm going to put all my inspiration photos inside there. Okay, so another thing you're going to want to make sure that you're doing is make sure you're using layers. So if you use an inspiration photo that you're putting down, make sure that's on its own layer. Name it original and lock it down. And you don't need to delete that. Keep that in your Illustrator file even when you turn it in, so I can see what you started with. Just don't start with like a painted picture. So like for example, don't do paintings. Oh my goodness, having a problem here typing. So you don't want to start with like something that's already painted like this. You don't want that. You need to start with an original image that you are then painting. So nothing like this. I want it to be an actual image. You're going to make sure that you delete your colors. So if I open, let's open a new file here. File new, I'm going to go to inches. I'm going to change this. I'm going to do 2 inches wide and 3 inches tall. I'm already in CMYK, so I'm fine. I'm going to say create. Let me just check that real quick. Okay. Under your swatches, make sure you go to these top lines and delete all unused and put those colors in the trash. If you use those default colors, you're going to lose points. So you need to pick colors on purpose for your specific theme of your project. I do not want you using any kind of default colors. And again, if you want to change your artboard to be square, just change it to 2 by 2, and then you have a square document. I'm perfectly fine with that if you prefer it. Okay, so if we come back over here, you're going to add your own swatch colors under Window, Color, Themes, Explore. That's one way to do it. There's a lot of ways. I'll walk you through another way here in a few minutes. But I do want to first pull in an image, because to pick our colors, we really need to know what our theme might be. You want to make sure that you're choosing 2 to 4 shades for your colors, so that you have some darker shades, some mid-tones, and some light shades. That's really important. Down below I've listed the grading elements, so what's important is that you're using a variety of brushes, a variety of stroke widths, that you use some opacity and variations of color so that you can add some depth and it doesn't look flat and all the same. You need to make sure you use a minimum of 5 layers and make sure that your layers are named. So don't just leave them layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. You need to name them specific. Impressionistic style, so making small strokes. That's really what an impressionistic style is. It's just trying to make some like kind of smaller little strokes so that when you zoom out as a whole, it looks finished, but when you zoom in, it's kind of like smaller impressionistic strokes. You're using no shapes or filled colors. It's all painted, so even your background is going to be painted. Make sure your painting looks complete. Don't ignore the background. I want to be able to make sure that I'm seeing the investment of time that you put into this project. Need to be able to see at least 8 hours that you've put in. Background needs to have something in, just don't leave it white, and definitely don't leave it as a solid color. for this project, I'm not going to be collecting your AI file. I'm going to collect a PDF, which I can actually open in Illustrator and see your layers. It'll just be a smaller file for you to upload, and also a PNG, which is like a quick view. Make sure that your files are named correctly. And you also need to upload your file that has your inspiration photos in it. So if you're just using one photo as inspiration, it's going to be in your file under layers. So I'm actually going to have a new layer that's called original, and my inspiration photo would be on here. If you did it the way that I was just showing you on my beach scene, that's a little different. So I just kind of drew my own and I used inspiration for it. So in that case, you're going to make a folder called inspiration. You're going to drop those files in there. You're going to zip it and you're going to upload them with the rest of your files. This is a way, just if your file is too large, you can hit Object Expand, but because we've reduced the file size, you should all be fine on this. And then these are just the files that you're going to be submitting. And of course, as always, I give you a rubric that's on the back, so make sure that you're paying attention to that. That's exactly where your grading elements come from. All right, so what we're going to do next is, at this point, I would Google something to try and find, you know, some kind of an inspiration, or what it is, what's the theme, and you guys need to spend a little bit of time making sure that you find something that you're really interested in. So for me, I pulled up just kind of a picture of some kind of some flowers here. It's a little big. Let me go back. Oh, didn't like that, so let me try again. File, place, and this wouldn't let me drag it to my desktop, so I just took a screenshot of it, which is perfectly fine too. So that's on my original layer. You can see here it's got this little blue square, meaning it's on that layer. If I put it on the wrong layer, I can always just drag that square to the other layer, and now it's on the other layer. So you don't have to delete it, just move the layer that you have, and then lock that down so that you don't touch it. So what I'm going to do next is I'm really going to be thinking about colors here, and I'm going to go to my swatches, and I'm going to go to swatch libraries, and trying to decide, I think I want to do something that's got some deep colors, so maybe something like this. It's kind of some earthy kind of tones, maybe some brown colors. I kind of like those shades, so maybe I drop both of those in. And remember, you can kind of filter through these colors to see if there's anything else you like. I'm just dropping them in here, anything that I might like. So I think that's probably good. I think I'm going to go with some flowers that are kind of like this tealy color. Just thinking about where I might put this. My husband is obsessed with flowers, so maybe I'll put this somewhere in my house. And I'm probably not going to use all of these colors, so I would just delete some. Like this one's, I really got this one for that brownie kind of color. So I would just delete the colors that I don't plan on using. I'm definitely not using any red in this. No greeny kind of color. These two are pretty similar, so maybe I'll just use that color. Kind of don't really like that color. So then I'm just going to take, let me go ahead and go here and delete those. So now I have some colors that, I like. And another way that you can do this is you can open your color guide and you can select a color. So let's say, let me pull my swatches out for a minute so I can open more than one. So I can click on a color here and it gives me some variations of that color. So you can see if I click on like this kind of tealy color, if I wanted kind of a darker color, it will give me one. So now I can take this and drag it into my swatches. So now I have like kind of a deeper shade. This looks similar to that color I already dropped in, but if I wanted a lighter one, I could drag that one in. And that one's pretty similar to this. This is just a little bit more accurate as far as getting you kind of those tints and shades of the specific colors that you pulled. So if I wanted to, I can actually just kind of look at these colors and maybe even pull in one lighter color. Not sure why I did that, but let me just move it up there. So now I've kind of created my own kind of shades of that blue color. And I can do the same thing with the brown. So I have a dark brown. I can come in and pull kind of like this. Let me pull a little darker one. Not sure what it's doing now, but okay. And then maybe pull in this little lighter kind of brown, and then an even lighter one, and then maybe I even get this color here. So now I can just take these and I can delete them. And now I've really purposely picked the colors that I want to use in my imagery. And I'm not keeping it exactly the same. I'm going to add a little bit of color up here in this kind of flower area just to make it a little different. So don't feel like you have to do exactly what is in your picture. It's kind of nice to make it a little bit more of your own. Another thing you can do in your layers is you can turn the opacity of your original image. You can turn this down if you want to, just so it's a little bit less kind of obtrusive, and you can also pay a little bit more attention to what it is that you're drawing. You don't have to do that. You can. Another technique that I've used for this is I have also, let me turn this back up and I'll show you. So one of the other things that I've done is, I might start drawing on here, but I might draw in a different color just so I could see the difference. But remember, you can always turn off the layer to see what it is that you have drawn in there. So there's my original. I have my colors. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go pick some brushes that I'm going to be using. So there's some default brushes. I'm probably not going to use any of these brushes, but I am going to go to the brush library. So just like there's color library, there's also a brush library. And I'm going to go down to artistic, and I'm going to click on, I'm just starting with the artistic chalk here, but it doesn't really matter. When you click on one, it adds it over in your brushes panel, so then they're easily accessible. So I'm really kind of looking at this style, that I want to use, and there's definitely a painterly kind of feel. These feel very solid, and I'm not going to make them as solid. I really want them to be a little bit rougher kind of looking, so I'm just going to add a couple of those. I'm going to come back in. These are ink, and you have to be careful because some of these, I think these are fine. I think it's the watercolor. You can't change them into different colors. So I'm going to add a few in here. I don't know exactly which ones that I'm going to use, but I'm just going to do a few, and we're going to give it a shot. I might even add that one. And I can always delete them later if I if I want to. Oh, this is a paintbrush one. That's not really going to be a good style for me. So I think it's the watercolor ones that don't allow you to change the color. I'm going to add one real quick and we'll try it. Let me move that one. Just leave it there. Okay, so obviously you don't want to use any of these kind of icon things. You just want to be using brushes. So I'm also going to add something like that, and maybe that one. This style doesn't really fit with what I'm doing. I've used those before. So that's it right now. Those are the ones that I'm going to be adding, and I can always go back and add some more if I feel like I need it. I'm also going to delete some of these that I'm not using. I'm going to leave that one for now. I do have some thin lines in there, so you never know, I might use that. So I want to try this watercolor version first. Let me go to my layers, just trying to make sure I'm on the layer. Okay, yeah, it does let you change some color, so that's nice. That watercolor one will come in handy because I do like kind of this washed looking area. I like that wash look. So I might even go back to my brushes, go to my open brush library, artistic, go back to paintbrush. Oh, not paintbrush, it was watercolor. And maybe even throw in a couple more of these. Let's go with that one and this one. And I'm going to delete this one. I'm not sure what that was. Okay. All right. Okay, so now I've got a good variety of brushes that I'm planning to try out. Doesn't mean they're all going to work or that I'm going to use them all. And if I don't like them, I'll just delete them just to kind of clear this up a little bit. I've got the swatch color palettes that I'm going to be using, and now I'm ready to paint. So what I will typically do is I either pick starting at the top or the bottom. That just makes the most sense to me. I like to kind of start with the structure. So for this one, this might be called the stem. And then, of course, I'm going to have another one that's kind of like your the flower outline. So we'll just start with those. Of course, I'm going to have one that has some leaves, and then I'll also have one that has some kind of like the painting area of the flower. I might separate the flowers, left flower, right flower as well. Just kind of depends on how much I have really going. And again, just because this is black or like that really dark, it kind of looks black to me. That has a sepia feeling to it, but I might just do them more of like a deep brown. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's go to the swatches. I'm also going to move this up so that I'm going to be toggling between these two, or actually 3 brushes, layers, and swatches. I can also open this up a little bit bigger, and I can separate these, so I can actually pull out my swatches. I only have that amount of color, so I can leave those open, and then I can also pull out my layers, make those a lot smaller. I can put those wherever really I want them. And then I just have my brushes kind of to deal with. So if I wanted to, I could just move those over here. Let's go ahead and collapse that. So I could do something like this so that I'm not opening and closing the windows over and over. And I'm actually going to be using my brushes probably a little bit more. Oops, I just hit them. That's bad news. Where did I put my layers? Just open those back up, possibly. I'm not really sure what that was, but okay, so obviously if you hover too close to that, it is gonna it's going to drop them in there. So just be real careful. Like I really need to be clicking over here on this left side. There we go. All right. So I have everything out that I need. And I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so I can just be a little bit closer, make sure I'm on that stem layer. I'm going to grab my brush. The only other thing that you might need, which I guess I probably should have opened, was the brush. Let me go get it real quick. I have brushes, but there's another one here. It's a window. Actually, maybe. You have to remember. No, Photoshop has an option where you can rotate things, and it's probably under properties. How about we just get started and then I'll address that as we need it. So if I click on my paintbrush tool and I'm just kind of looking at this, the look of this here, I want something that has kind of a solid kind of feel to it. I'm going to start with my dark brown, so you're going to want to make sure that it's your stroke color. That's what the brush is really going to be working with here. So I can just kind of draw and see how thick my stroke is right now. And the reason it's so big and it's only 1 point is because we're working at a very small size. So now you can see I'm at 0.1 and you can kind of see how small that is. So I might go up to 0.2. So I can try and draw this, you know, in one kind of stroke. And remember, it doesn't need to be exactly like what I'm looking at. I'm just kind of using that as really a guide. And if I want to add a little bit more texture, I might come in and go back to my color guide and pick a little darker color here. Just drop that in. And then, because this is kind of like that, it is brown, but I might want something that's a little bit darker, just to add a little bit of contrast there. So if I add some of this, let me go up here and make this 0.1. And so now I can kind of draw, I might draw a little on top of that. And I'm not going to do the solid kind of look this time. I'm going to do something a little different so that it covers some of it, but it doesn't cover all of that brown. I kind of like that darker little color, the darker color better. And of course I can always turn off my layer and kind of see what it is that I have. And when I was talking about using opacities, this is kind of what I'm talking about. So like I might come in here and select this darker color, and I could have put this darker color on its own layer so it's easier to grab, and then I can turn the opacity down so that it feels like it blends a little bit more and it's not as harsh of a color. And if I decided that I didn't really like this this second brown color, one of the things I can do is I can come in and select that that brown color that's underneath. I just need to find an area. So it's selected the brown, and I can go to select same stroke color, and it'll select everything. And I can double click on that color and maybe just make it just slightly darker. I can change the color to really whatever I want here, and say okay, and it'll just change that swatch and everything that I have selected. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick something that's a little bit thinner, and I'm going to go to, let's go with leaves, and I'm going to do the leaves outline. So I'm going to kind of treat the paint kind of color a little differently. but I do want to hit kind of this kind of darker area here. And so I'm going to leave that. Let's go with this darker color here. I'm clicked on a different brush, and I'm just going to go ahead and try it out to kind of see. That's a little bit thick. Let me move it over just to kind of look at it. So I'm going to select it. You don't have to redraw it every time. I'm going to come back up here and go just 0.1. So that feels a little better. And I don't really like the angle of what I did, so I'm just going to Command Z. I'm just going to add a little bit here. That piece, I think I'm going to move over just a tiny bit. And I know this is significantly lighter, so I might draw in a little bit of this and then select it and turn down that opacity just to kind of keep with that. That feels a little gray versus brown, so I'm going to change it to a different color, and I'm also going to change the size of it so it's a little thinner. All right, so let me go back to my brush, and I'm going to go back to a little darker color. And if you forget what color you use, you can always just click on something, and then it kind of shows you the color that you used. And I'm on Still on Leaves Outline Background or Layer, so I'm good. I'm going to come up here, do something like that. So I'm just really kind of mimicking my image, but it doesn't need to be exact. I'm going to change this to 0.05. I'm going to change these and these also to 0.05. And I'm also going to change them to this browner kind of color and turn the opacity down a little bit. This one, I'm just going to turn it down just slightly. Okay. And I can turn this off just to kind of see where I'm at. Make sure that I like the direction that I'm going. And just turn it back on, and I'm good to keep going. And so this is basically how I'll continue. I'll go to the flower outlines. I might change this to, I think the first color I'm going to go a little darker. And my outlines, I'm kind of going with that same kind of look. So I think I used this one last time. I think this one might have a little too much variation. I also have my opacity down. So let me just look at it. I actually kind of like that. So let me check my colors fine. Let me check this one. Like that too. I mean, I'm adding teal, so I don't have to go as much browns as what they did here. So I'm going to start with this one, and I'm going to do something like this. And I will typically just try a couple of strokes here, and then I'll turn off this layer just to kind of check and see, do I like it? And that feels a little bit stiff to me. So I'm going to select those and go to a different brush. And I think that is probably going to work a little bit better. And I might just take that and go to 0.07. So when I talk about variations of brushes, this is what I'm talking about. So not everything needs to be 0.1. I'm going to be clicking on your different things, and I'm going to be looking up here to see, like, did you use some variations? And I click around quite a bit, but you definitely want to make sure that you are using some variation. Okay, so I'm going to go back in here. Let me go ahead and select this brush so it activates it, so I'm using the same one again. And I'm just going to come in and kind of draw, you know, some of these. And again, They don't need to be exact. I could select that one later and make it bigger, or I could really just focus on kind of one size and then go back and focus on some of those kind of different sizes all at one time. So I'm just going to do a few here, a few little strokes. Going to look at what we have. So I got quite a few of like kind of those little bigger, the like bigger ones. So I'm going to go ahead and make another one. And this one I could call flower left if I wanted to, or I can come over here and do the outline of this other one. I could do kind of that same thing, just really focus on the one size. Really didn't like what I did there, so I'm going to try that again. Do something more like this. So I'm just kind of focusing on kind of those bigger kind of areas right now. And let's just kind of turn off. You could kind of see I have like this little outline thing going here, and that's perfectly fine. I want to get to some of the color. I don't need to finish all of this. I just kind of want to show you kind of the gist here. I'm going to call this the kind of highlights, and I'm going to call them dark. So I'm going to first kind of hit some of these darker areas in those, like this kind of color here. So I'm going to go to one of these watermarks, and I'm going to go ahead and just kind of draw so I can see what color it is. And the watermark, that brush is making it really light. So I can kind of flip around here to see, are there any others, you know, that I really like. And of course I can also make that brush significantly larger so that it kind of helps me just to see, you know, what it is that I'm looking at. And I really don't like that one because it's really hard. I like the kind of transparent kind of look. Obviously those aren't going to work. That's actually kind of interesting. I like that one too. Ooh, I really like that one. And so if I wanted something like this, I can also go to Object, Transform, Reflect, and I can reflect it. I can rotate it, you know, so it goes in whatever direction I really want it to be in. I'm also going to really play with some of these opacities here because as you start kind of stacking these on top of each other, they will interact and they will kind of bleed through. That color will bleed through. And if you get something like this, you can always just click on it with the white arrow and adjust where it's kind of going. So then that way it doesn't go off the flower. Not that you can't have it. I mean, there is like this messy feel here. I just don't want like a pointy piece going off. And also you don't want it to look too pattern-like. So I can see there's like these little patterns starting to come in here. So I might come over and kind of change my brush to something else so it doesn't feel so pattern-like. So I'll just keep doing things like this. Make sure that you're adjusting your transparency. I'm going to bring this in a little bit more. I'm going to make that one a little bit, it might be a little too dark, but we'll start with that. And just remember right now I have my highlights on top of my kind of outlines. So if I turn this off, you can see that the highlights are on top. So I would bring that down so that the highlights are actually kind of falling underneath it. So I'm going to turn this one down. So you can kind of see that direction that I'm taking, and I've done kind of a lot of small brushes. You can definitely do some kind of bigger ones. I know I don't even have this turned on, but you can do some like bigger ones in one color and then come back and hit, you know, some of those other areas in another. And if you're having a hard time kind of selecting areas, make sure that you utilize locking your layers. So once I'm done with kind of those highlight dark areas, now, sorry, the flower outline, lock that down. So then you don't accidentally, you know, select them, but more or less you're just kind of working with that highlighted area. So this is that painting, impressionistic kind of style painting. This is what I'm looking for. Make sure that you have something that's in the background. So even if, let's say we're going to put this on my wall and I want a white background, perfectly fine. But for the project, you have to have a background. So even if I selected, let's just say I grabbed this like kind of bluish color, and it's a very light blue, and I just do something kind of like this, you know, where I'm kind of seeing just a little bit of kind of some blue back there. I can do something like that. This is kind of annoying that you can see this line through here, so I would definitely fix that, but just to kind of give you an idea, I'm just looking for you to not leave that background perfectly white. I do want to see you doing something with the background. It can be subtle. It doesn't have to be complex or even full, but I do want to see a little something. This is not enough. I can't really even see that. If I go to presentation mode, we can see like a little line right here and a little over here, but that's not enough. So make sure that you're really thinking about that. And that is it. So you're just going to continue working with layers. I mean, I'm not even very far along with this, and you can see how many layers. I already have 5 layers that I'm working on, so just continue with that, and don't feel like you're tied to the colors that you've already selected. Like this feels, let me delete that. This feels very brown compared to these others, so I might change those to that little darker color, or I might just turn up the opacity because I turned it way down so that it feels a little bit darker. That still feels pretty brown to me. And you can see why you would do the background at the end because it kept selecting. So just make sure you do that at the end. Or, you know, just turn the layer off if you're kind of going back and making some changes. And again, make alterations if you need to. It doesn't need to look exactly like that reference photo. You know, it's exactly that. It's a reference. So you make it whatever way you want to. So like when I'm looking at this, I know I kind of followed that picture, but some of it I don't really like the angle, so I might change some of it. Even this leaf needs a little bit more work. So that's what you guys need to be working on. Just follow those instructions. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Make sure you save often. Last name, first initial. This is project 7, and you can just call it painting. You don't have to call it impressionistic painting, just painting, and you would put it in this folder that says inspiration. It has the inspiration folder, so I would hit save. Okay, so when I come back over to that painting folder, you'll see that there's my AI file and there's my inspiration file. This file is already 3.6 megs. That's why we're keeping it so small in size, because the layers and the brushes really do make your file sizes a little bit larger. Okay, that's all I have for you guys. Have fun with this project. I got addicted to it when I learned how to do this. a little less than a year ago. I think this is one of the funnest projects that we do. So have fun with it, and that is all I have.